Coming up on the program, this Labor Day weekend, we're honoring the men and women whose work saves lives every day. From the battlefield surgeons of Gettysburg to the world-class physicians leading Florida's healthcare today, medicine has always been a labor of care.
Support for What's Health Got to Do with It is provided in part by the American Brain Foundation invests in research across the spectrum of the brain, knowing all brain diseases, disorders, and injuries are connected. There can be no cures without research. Learn how you can make a difference today at americanbrainfoundation.org. Rethreaded knows human trafficking destroys lives, but they also know it's not the end of the story. Rethreaded believes in the potential and power of all survivors to reclaim their lives. Visit rethreaded.com to learn more. And Elevate Med. Through mentorship, leadership development, financial literacy, a robust peer network, and tuition-based scholarship support, Elevate Med is dedicated to the next generation of diverse physician leaders as a tangible step towards the eradication of health disparities. More at elevatemed.org.
From the moment we're born to our last breath, every American embarks on a journey through the intricate maze of the healthcare system. These are their stories, one life at a time. Today, we meet Jonathan. He arrives at a field hospital after suffering violent head trauma. He's unresponsive, with shallow breathing and frothy blood oozing from his mouth and nose. Nearby, others scream in agony. One boy's eyes are gone, another's legs, another's entire face torn apart. Surgeons work frantically. What's happening? And why are so many patients arriving like this? Hi, I'm Dr. Joe Servin, a practicing neurologist at Mayo Clinic, professor of healthcare administration and policy at Arizona State University, and this is What's Health Got to Do with It, which looks at where and how healthcare intersects with your life, helping you get the medical answers you want. Now let's turn our attention back to Jonathan. This isn't a modern trauma center, nor a TV set. It's Gettysburg, 1863, the site of the U.S. Civil War's bloodiest battle, which left over 50,000 casualties in 3 days, overwhelming surgeons with unimaginable injuries and primitive tools. To tell this story of bravery, brutality, and medical innovation, we're joined by historian Barbara Franco. Now, Barbara is founding director emeritus of the Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center at Gettysburg, where she helped create exhibits on battlefield medicine and the surgeons who worked amid chaos. She's a leading authority on 19th century medical history, has dedicated her career to bringing untold Civil War stories to light, and her fantastic new book, Gettysburg's Surgeons, Facing a Common Enemy in the Civil War's Deadliest Battle, explores the story, and today I hope to learn how those physicians shaped modern medicine and what their legacy means for healthcare today. Barbara joins us now from Pennsylvania. Ms. Franco, welcome to our program.
It's great to be with you.
Barbara, let's get right into it. Your book plunges us right, I think it's fair to say, into the horror of Gettysburg's field hospitals. What drew you to tell the story of these surgeons?
Well, as you mentioned, I was on this team that was working on the exhibits to open the Gettysburg Seminary Ridge Museum in 2013. And the amazing thing was that we seemed to know more about the nurses and the patients than we actually did about the surgeons themselves. And so I was really curious, who were these men? And they were mostly men who had to deal with this incredible disaster of so many wounded, and what was the work that they did. And I just really wanted to know who they were. And that really led me into really trying to see it through their eyes as much as I could.
Barbara, you describe surgeons working under horrific conditions, no anesthesia, no antiseptics, overwhelming numbers of patients. What was the typical day like for them during and after the battle?
Well, they didn't have antiseptics, but they did have anesthesia. They used both chloroform and ether. And the descriptions that they leave in their diaries and their letters, many of them talk about working nonstop from daylight to the end of the day till nighttime, sometimes even through the night, constantly doing operations. And they worked in teams, but many of them would work as long as they could and they even describe until their hands were so cramped that they couldn't hold the knife anymore, and they'd turn it over to someone else to keep going.
My goodness.
So it's an incredible, there was an incredible urgency because they did understand that the sooner that they could do the amputations, the better results that they would have. The longer the wounded were on the battlefield, the longer that their wounds were undressed, the more chance there was for infection and death.
I want to get into some of the specifics. When I was talking the intro, and I imagine just by thinking of the type of weaponry that they used in war, that there were a lot of lung and chest injuries. And in fact, in that description for the case when we started our discussion with you, that frothy blood suggests some problem with the lung. And I'm wondering, how did these Civil War surgeons, did they even understand what chest trauma meant back then?
Oh yeah. They were aware of. They knew the anatomy well, and they also understood their limitations. So the understanding was that your chances of survival were best if you had a wrist wound, an arm wound, where it is on your extremities. The further it was from your torso, the better chance you had for survival. I mean, not 100%, but that was, an understanding that they had. Wounds to the torso were very, very difficult. Basically, if you had a wound anywhere in your abdomen with intestines, etc., the infection without antibiotics was a given. There was very little chance for survival. Chest wounds are interesting because a number of people did survive them. And there's one Confederate patient who doesn't leave Camp Letterman, the general hospital that is set up later in the summer. He doesn't leave until November, and he talks about being on his back for 75 days without moving or getting up out of bed. And so they basically just stabilized him and tried to allow that lung wound to heal on its own. And it did. He actually survived and managed to get home after the war and had a life afterwards.
Amazing in that day and age. Also in the intro, there were a lot of the other side of the wounds had to do with orthopedic injuries. Maybe I should better put just having limbs blown off. And so this gave rise to like lots of amputations on a massive scale. And I'm just wondering how I know many a surgeon, many an orthopedist. How did surgeons back then make such literally impossible decisions? And what did it do to the people who did survive that when the limbs are being sawed off because of survival issues?
Right. I mean, we tend to think, and even some of the nurses and the civilians that came to take care of patients tended to think of amputation as being something cruel. Or that the surgeons, were butchers. From the surgeon's standpoint, many of them, in retrospect, felt that they hadn't done enough amputations. They wished they had done more, had been able to do more, because they saw it as life-saving. The way mangled limbs are not going to heal on their own, and they simply the only chance for survival really is amputation, to have a clean wound and hope that that will heal. Did it leave people with disabilities after the war? Absolutely. And it also spurred an incredible industry of arm and legs that they were able to create, that people would be able to walk on them, just as we have today, fake legs and fake arms. Of course, it's much more technologically advanced now, but they were experimenting with how to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to return to some kind of normal life. There are some patients that had one amputation and one leg that wasn't amputated, and the leg that wasn't amputated left them almost more disabled than the amputated leg.
Let me ask you this, Barbara. When you look at all of these stories from these surgeons, from a medical history perspective, what did we learn now? What key innovations, or maybe better put, key mistakes to avoid, came out of Gettysburg that still echoes in modern trauma care now, if you will?
Well, Jonathan Letterman, who was the medical director of the Army of the Potomac on the Union side, is credited with something that's called the Letterman system.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a career Army medical doctor, and he was about 39 at the time, not still a young man, but he really looked at how to institutionalize, how to regularize the treatment in after battle situations. So he put into place an ambulance corps that was organized to bring patients off the battlefield as quickly as possible and to get them to a place of care. He really instituted a system of triage, so that when the patients came to a hospital, they were sorted by the type of wounds that they had. So lightly wounded might be set aside. Those that required amputations or surgery would be the first priority. And then there were others, those with abdominal wounds that really had very little hope for survival, would basically be set aside and dosed with just painkillers to keep them pain-free.
Sure. And to all of our listeners out there, you're listening to What's Health Got to Do with It on WJZT News 89.9. I'm Dr. Joe Servin, and if you're just joining us, we're in conversation with historian Barbara Franco about Gettysburg's surgeons. And we want to hear from you. Tag me on social media at jservin. Barbara, I know when you said that about the pain medications, that's assuming the very limited amount that they had. But I want to hit on yet another topic that still echoes in current times, is that you write a lot in this book from these letters about blood-tinged filth and infection. And I'm wondering, how far were these doctors and surgeons from understanding germ theory and its consequences? Do they know bacteria and virus and stuff like that? Or we that's a little way off. Can you talk a little bit about the infection knowledge, if you will?
Well, it's sort of a tragedy that Joseph Lister really published his findings about bacteria and the germ theory after the Civil War.
Of course.
So surgeons during the Civil War did not have access to that. There was some understanding that they had from observation and just their clinical experience. So they didn't know what caused diseases, but they could see how diseases progressed. So they did understand vaccination for smallpox, and that was something that was done widely during the Civil War. They understood that there was an acquired immunity for certain diseases like measles. If you'd had measles once, you weren't going to get them again. And they knew that dysentery came from bad water, but they didn't know precisely what exactly was the vehicle for that. They didn't understand cholera either. I mean, the causes of these diseases were not known to them. But they were clinicians, so they understood infection by the kind of pus. They talked about the color of the pus, laudable pus. They could kind of monitor the progress of infection. They didn't know it was strep versus such and such, but they could tell that there were different kinds of reactions to what they saw were some kind of infections. They didn't understand exactly what it was. They also understood smell. They could smell different diseases and different odors, so that would give them some ideas. But by the end of the Civil War and by Gettysburg, they were beginning to understand that there were some things they could do to treat those symptoms. They didn't know the cause, but they knew the symptoms. And so sometimes they would talk about putting alcohol on a wound because it reduced the amount of pus or the smell of the infection. They also began using bromine on wounds to prevent gangrene and had success with that. They even sprayed bromine in gangrene wards. They also understood that gangrene spread through a ward. So they kind of are seeing how things work, but they don't understand the exact origins of these things. So it's kind of they are interested, they're trying to figure it out, but they just don't know. And honestly, it's even in 1876, I believe, Lister came to the United States and lectured to doctors in Philadelphia. And many of them poo-pooed his ideas and said, oh, this is ridiculous. So even in 1876, which is well beyond the Civil War, the medical profession was still resistant to the idea of germ theory.
Got it. I'm curious, Barbara. When I was reading the book, many of the assistant surgeons, William Child's writings, they're amongst the other surgeons that are in the book, are very haunting. And they're very evocative, hyper descriptive stories, as I kind of showed in the introduction to our conversation. Why do you think those type of letters, when you read them, they still resonate today?
They do, and I think it is because they place you so much in the moment that they're dealing with. And I think one of the interesting things about this whole project was I did a lot of the research and the writing for this book during the COVID epidemic.
Oh my goodness.
And I really couldn't help but relate to them and their descriptions of trying to deal with things that they didn't understand. They were trying to help patients, but they didn't know what the cause was. And early in COVID, people weren't sure what was the right way to treat this. What was causing this? How did they do that? Clinicians were really in the dark. And I thought, wow, I could really relate to what the Civil War surgeons were saying when you don't know everything, when you don't have papers about this, and you don't have, this is the best kinds of treatments to use. And we know this because they were experimenting and trying to figure it out on their own, on the front lines. Just as many clinicians during COVID were doing the same thing.
When most people think of surgeons, they think of the modern antiseptic OR and OR nurses and other aides all around that surgeon. What role did the aides, and I assume they're mostly women or nursing folks, play in the care of these Gettysburg's patients after the surgeon? Were they part of those operations? How did it work with them?
Well, for the most part, women in medical care greatly expanded during the Civil War. And you have to realize that there were, how did you take care of these patients? There's the surgery, but then there's the recovery. And these were long recoveries, months sometimes. These people were dehydrated. They hadn't eaten for days. Many of them were too weak to eat. How did you feed them? How did you do? There's no intravenous hydration. Someone had to put food into their mouth, had to help feed them. Also, there was a whole system of special diet, and women were very, very involved in that. The nurses often were in charge of the special diet kitchens, and this was to make things that the patients could eat, something soft, something digestible. Regular Army rations were hardtack and boiled beef, which was not really palatable to a patient that was recovering and weak. So there was a lot of important work that they did, and really a lot of the women especially really added to the whole idea of nursing as a profession. And that really comes out of the Civil War very strongly.
Barbara, from what you've learned, if you took a modern surgical team back to Gettysburg for a day during this war, what do you think would shock the current modern day surgeons, and maybe what would they recognize?
Well, I've talked to orthopedic surgeons who say that the surgery that they were doing during the Civil War is almost identical to the surgery that they do today for amputation.
Wow.
Except with the exception that now there's obviously antibiotics and antiseptics, and they use power saws instead of hand saws. But accounts of surgeons during the Civil War and in the 19th century, they were able to do an amputation in less than 10 minutes.
Wow, that is incredible.
Which sounds incredible, but speed was extremely important in early surgery because it reduced the amount of stress that you were putting patients under. The less time they were under anesthesia, and just in terms of shock, etc., and blood loss. So they worked really fast. And when you understand that they're doing this for an entire day, every 10 minutes, another amputation, basically, that's pretty amazing.
Barbara, in our last moments here, as we reflect on these stories, what lessons do you see for today's physicians and health systems, especially when we have so many mass casualty events and war zones happening at any time? What lessons do you take away from this for all of us?
Well, oddly, the lesson I take away is obviously the trauma part of it, and EMTs and people on the front lines still use some of the same techniques. But in a way, the real contribution that the Civil War surgeons provided is public health, because we think about the battles, but they were actually in charge of the health of the troops 365 days of the year. So they were in charge of sanitation. They were in charge of keeping them healthy, clean water, changing where were the latrines located. And so they actually become, and one of the biggest contributions to medicine that they make is understanding that the health of a community is really important. And they go home and they found public health boards and are very active in the public health movement to establish clean water, vaccinations, and really a lot of that is attributable to our longer lives and especially infant mortality. So it's in a way the heroic efforts of the battlefield are important, but it was actually the day-to-day keeping the troops healthy, because something like 2/3 of the casualties of the Civil War are actually from disease, not battlefield wounds.
Interesting. And I'm going to let that be our final word. Barbara, I want to thank you so much for writing this book and for giving us your time today. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I hope it's a great Labor Day weekend for you.
Thanks so much.
We've been talking to historian Barbara Franco. She's the author of the fantastic new book, Gettysburg Surgeons, Facing a Common Enemy in the Civil War's Deadliest Battle. Up next, after your weekly health headlines, we'll talk with Colin Hood, who has 17 food allergies, and his mother, Christine, about how they navigate around it. Stay with us. Hey, it's Dr. Joe Servin. I have a new show called This Week in Health, and it's part of WJCT News Now. Local news you can listen to anytime, anywhere. When you sign up, you'll unlock 4 local podcasts delivered straight to your podcast app. I break down the week's biggest health headlines and what they mean for you. Start a free 30-day trial at wjct.org/newsnow. And if you like it, become a monthly donor to support WJCT Public Media.
Hi, I'm Stacey Bennett, producer of What's Health Got to Do with It, and these are your weekly health headlines. A newly released nationwide survey of physicians reveals that medical misinformation has surged in recent years, with over half of doctors reporting that false or misleading claims are negatively affecting patient care. Conducted by researchers at the Pew Research Center, the survey notes that misinformation is especially prevalent on social media and online platforms. Doctors say that correcting these beliefs requires more time and appointments and can even erode trust between patients and providers as conspiracy theories and health myths proliferate. A new study from the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center shows that fat cells inside breast cancer tumors may drive more aggressive disease, especially for women who are overweight or obese. In a study of triple-negative breast cancer, a harder-to-treat form, scientists found that tumors with more fat cells were linked to worse outcomes and increased likelihood of recurrence. Fat cells were found to alter the tumor's environment, making it easier for cancer to spread and resist treatment. Health experts and the CDC are warning swimmers and seafood lovers about Vibrio vulnificus, a dangerous bacteria found in warm coastal waters. The bacteria can enter the body through small cuts, scrapes, or by eating contaminated raw shellfish, and may cause severe illness or even death, especially for people with weakened immune systems. Symptoms of Vibrio infection include fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and skin lesions. Quick medical attention is crucial if infection is suspected. Now for some good news. A groundbreaking study from the National Institutes of Health reveals new insights into how the brain responds to the sensation of a phantom limb. Using advanced brain imaging and stimulation techniques, researchers found that the brain's response to missing limbs is surprisingly flexible, even years after an amputation. This challenges previous notions that the brain's sensory map hardwires itself and can't adapt once a limb is lost. This finding could lead to better brain-computer interfaces for those who have lost a limb. And those are your weekly health headlines.
Good to have you both on board. Um, One of the things that I want to get right into, and Christine, I'll start with you, is when did you first suspect that Colin's reactions to food were more than just a sensitivity, if you will?
It was honestly right the first time I fed him, right after he was born. His face swelled up, and we didn't know right away it was a food reaction. But they took him out of my arms, brought him to the nursery, checked him out. They thought it was a clogged tear duct. Brought him back. I ate, fed him. It happened again, and within just a matter of days, I mean, he was covered in eczema. He was getting hives. So at a very young age, we had him tested, and he was diagnosed early on with multiple, and then over the course of the years, we're now actually up to 17 food allergies that we've found.
Wow. Colin, remind us all, how old are you? What grade are you in at this time?
So I'm 14 and I'll be going into my freshman year within the next week.
So here's the question that I bet folks are wondering, at least I was, when you are at school or wherever you're located, some public setting, how do you navigate, if you will, perhaps if you have to go to the cafeteria or something, knowing all these foods have these potential problems for you?
Well, it's all about awareness, really. I mean, it goes from spatial awareness to really just knowing who knows really about it. Like I know some of my closer friends who know very well how bad my allergies are and what they can and can't have around me. And sure, they do eat some of my allergens near me, but I always make sure, and they make sure that it's within space that's far enough away that I'm not getting into contact with it. And I'm always washing my hands. It's a big part of the allergy world, washing or wiping. Hand sanitizer doesn't really work. It's kind of a misnomer, but it just kind of moves around the food protein. So we always use wipes or washing.
How far does these other foods have to be from you before they start to impact you?
So I'm not airborne, luckily, which is a problem for a lot of other people. But if it comes into contact with my skin or I ingest it, is the big problem. So there's been a couple times in school where I have had like milk like splatter and it's gotten on my skin, and I'll get some hives on my arm, which is probably one of the easier reactions because it's a little quicker to treat, and I didn't have to take my epinephrine, which was obviously a good thing. But
if I may, everybody's different. So, some people are airborne allergic, some people it's contact, other times you can be more sensitive. We don't really understand why. Every day could be a different reaction, even for the same person. And Colin's symptoms have also been very different. But if he has any ingestion, even the most microscopic amount, he would go into anaphylaxis, and he has gone into anaphylaxis at school.
Christine, could you kind of expand, just in case someone doesn't know what that word means? What does anaphylaxis mean?
I know we get used to some words when we're in the food allergy community. So anaphylaxis is a severe allergic reaction that can impact multiple body systems. So it can be anything from your skin showing hives to your airways closing, lip or throat swelling. It can be your cardiovascular system can be impacted, even like stomach, vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, contractions in the stomach. It's amazing how many different body systems can be affected. But epinephrine is the only medication that can stop this. And the goal is to stop your body from thinking that the food that you ate is bad. We always tell Colin as a little kid that your body thinks the food is a bad guy, and your body shuts down to protect itself. But by shutting down, it's not protecting itself. So epinephrine, which in the past it was always an injectable form, and Colin was terrified of needles, terrified. And so the idea that he would hesitate or I would hesitate administering it because you knew he was going to freak out from the needle. So now there's a nasal epinephrine that just came out most recently. And it's so simple and so easy to use and so convenient, and like minimal side effects of just maybe some runny nose, headache, or nasal discomfort. But that's really changed a lot for us, because now he carries it. He's confident. He shows his friends. They feel like they're more confident if they had to administer. So that's really, we want anaphylaxis to be treated, or any severe allergic reaction to be treated immediately with epinephrine. The longer you wait, for epinephrine, the more likely a fatal outcome can be from a severe allergic reaction. So early administration of epinephrine is really important.
And we're going to get into that nasal spray because I think that is a huge advance in this area. Colin, let me ask you this, so you're getting ready for school, freshman year, as you were mentioning. If there is some sort of social function, or school trip or get together, is there some type of prep that you need to do?
Yeah, I actually would say there's somewhat of a prep. I always make sure I obviously have, a form of epinephrine at the time. For me, I use Neffy, which is the nasal epinephrine, which I actually have right here. I'll make my food because not a lot of places along the way of school trips can usually accommodate for the amount of allergies I have.
Right.
So it's a little easier for me to just bring something safe from home. And obviously having wipes in case I need to wipe my hands or even a surface so I can put my food down and not have to worry about touching something that's unsanitary.
Got it.
So, and then the last, probably most important step for me is knowing that somebody like a teacher or a coach or even a friend knows where my medicine is in case I do have an allergic reaction. And because my last allergic reaction, I actually went unconscious.
Oh my goodness.
So I need somebody who is conscious to be able to make the decisions for me while I'm out. So.
Sure, I gotcha. Christine, I'm going to ask you this. I know many a parent that has to negotiate severe allergies. I even have some relatives that have had to go down this route as well. I'm wondering if you can just speak to those parents, if they find themselves in similar shoes like you. What would you say to them?
Oh, there's so much that I've learned the hard way that I want to say. First of all, it's communicate and normalize. I mean, on average now, the prevalence is up. It's roughly 2 students in every classroom likely has food allergies. And so the more you communicate with the school nurses, who I call my heroes because they've helped Colin in the past, the teachers, the administrators, work to create policy and procedure in the schools so that there's an inclusive environment. Work with the PTOs to educate them on how severe food allergies can be. That's what we started to do. Colin even sat on the wellness committee in our town to help change policy because we wanted to adjust that every single time someone had a birthday wasn't a life-threatening experience for these kids with food allergies. So those are the things that food allergy parents are not trying to ruin your kid's cupcake, experience. Instead, what we're trying to do is create a safe environment where everybody can learn and celebrate together. So that's really the most important thing, is educating, communicating openly, trying not to get angry, trying not to let fear drive everything, and just empowering your kid most of all, that they can live the most full life. We just require a little bit vigilance around food and making sure we're prepared. But with that, I mean, he's trying out for varsity, soccer as a freshman, and he plays baseball and he plays piano and he does all these things that every other kid can do. He's amazing at school. Life is normal. We just have to be a little more careful than everybody else around food.
I get it. Colin, I'm going to ask you this before we switch into discussing about epinephrine and things of that sort. It sounds like you've learned to become a very good advocate for yourself. Have there been moments where you've just been surprised in terms of battles that you've had to fight, or has it not been as tough in terms of fighting battles? Is it most people been understanding, or just been a mixed bag?
Yeah, definitely. Most people are understanding. I'd say adults are a little bit more understanding than kids, which obviously is a little harder for me, dealing with a lot more kids than other people. But also having a close-knit circle of friends has helped me, because I just had to let them know, and I've known them since I was 4 or 5, so knowing them over close to a decade has been easier to manage with food allergies.
Mm-hmm. I remember being at a zoo and a little boy, this was in preschool, and a little boy looked at his mom because she opened a granola bar for herself.
Right.
And he yelled at her to put that away because we were near Colin and we shouldn't eat that. It was just the most adorable thing, watching kids look out for each other.
I love that. And to all of our listeners out there, you're listening to What's Health Got to Do with It on WJZT News 89.9. I'm Dr. Joe Servant, and if you're just joining us, we are in conversation with Christine and Colin Hood, who has numerous food allergies and how they navigate around it. And we want to hear from you. Tag us on social media at JServin. Okay, so let's talk about Neffy. You brought it. This is now a nasal epinephrine. And perhaps I'll just ask it this way. How did you first hear that there is something nasal, which I think, as opposed to an injection, which is the way most of us think about it, and then, tell us about that.
The first time I actually heard about it was at a food allergy conference. So I'm very involved in FAIR's teen advocacy and advisory group and other groups within FAIR. But at the conference, I learned of it because there was a table there with information about it, and I was like, "What's this?" And as soon as it got to market, we were like, "We got to get it." So we talked to our doctor about it, and she was like, "Yeah, you can get it," and it's been life-changing, honestly.
Yeah.
Christine, let me ask you this. When it comes to it, has it been readily available? I know people will ask us that type of question very frequently.
Yeah. I mean, for us, we didn't have any problem at all accessing it. And so we picked it up. It was delivered to us, the mechanism, and then we've had to refill. It's not an issue at all for us.
Does it have a longer life on the shelf, in bathroom cabinets, things of that sort, than the traditional injectable?
Yes, there's a couple great things that we didn't expect, which is the longer shelf life. I mean, it was almost 2 years, where the other ones every year they're having to refill. So right there, that was amazing. Also temperature. So I think we said Colin plays baseball and soccer, and we were out in really hot temperatures a lot. And so we're obsessed with trying to find cold places for epinephrine, and you don't really put it in a cooler. So it was just hard. But the temperature range is way higher. It can sustain way higher temperatures for longer periods of time. So we don't have to be afraid and obsessed. We can just go and play baseball rather than worry about where our epinephrine's going. It's just been amazing. Even we were ziplining in Costa Rica on vacation not too long ago. It's a great trip. And they told us we couldn't have anything in our pockets, and we wear like a belt with our epinephrine in it, usually when they're the big injectors. And because we couldn't have anything, we were able to just there's this little case, and we were able to just clip it to my tank top and fly over the treetops in the jungle. And they serve food in the treetops at the different platforms. So if we didn't have this, it could have been a really risky situation. So the convenience and the temperature, there's a lot of unexpected benefits that have come from it for us.
I love that. I can only imagine zip lining in Costa Rica with epinephrine, but I love this, hearing this sense of freedom when it comes to it. Let me ask you just a practical question. Does that mean that given when you have to get these epinephrines, does that mean you have to get several of them, and then you have to have one at school, one at home? I mean, is that how it works?
It's different for everybody. So that one is very unique to each individual. For us, when he was really little, there were requirements where we had to have one that was permanently stationed in daycare. And then I had one, and he would go to my parents, his grandparents. So we ended up wanting them to have one. So having multiples was important. As he gets older and he can self-carry, don't have to have as many. But it is important to make sure you have them accessible everywhere, not in locked cabinets with people that are trained. They also always come in 2 packs. So there's even Neffy will come 2 per package, and any injector comes the same way. But the reason for that is because if you administer one and your symptoms don't go away in a short period of time, then you would give yourself a second one. It's rare for that to occur, but that's why they come in 2 in case you need a second dose. But again, it's rare for that to happen.
I have to ask this question, but it is part of the DNA of our show, which is always about cost and finances related to that. Is there a huge price difference, or is it more about the copay and your insurance? Because that's the type of question a lot of people would have.
A lot of people are asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that you know how insurance works in our
Yeah.
country, so it's different for everybody. Really, if you go to neffy.com, if you're talking about the nasal epinephrine, and ask even all the injectors are different. So it's for us, it's not been a difference. So if you go to neffy.com and you can do that research to see what your insurance covers, and it'll be different for everybody.
Christine, let me ask you this question. This is more of a parenting question. How do you strike that balance between caution and independence, if you will?
Independence is being able to self-advocate and speak up for yourself. So I think caution and empathy is something we want to teach in my opinion, we should be teaching everybody. So if you're looking out for yourself and you're looking out for other people, then caution is required to make sure each other is safe. And we do the same for our friends. We have friends that have different allergies than us, and we have to be just as cautious with them. So the tipping point is not to live in fear, I think, because it's very easy to fall into fear. And I am in a community of food allergy parents myself, where I used to live in more of a place of fear. And now I'm much more in a place of what power do we have, and how can we empower our kids to make sure that we are living really fulfilled lives, but doing it cautiously, to use your word, and with vigilance, because once you let that guard down is when stuff happens. So I try not to live in fear, but definitely live in caution, and living as fully and wholly. Like I said, you zip line, you play on the sports teams, try not to say no because of the food allergies, try to figure out how to make something work with the food allergies.
Colin, I'm wondering if are there any big myths that you have heard that you just you just still seem surprised, or that you try to dispel all the time? I'm wondering if I could ask you, what's the most common myth that you hear from maybe other classmates or other people in general that you'd love to dispel?
I think a big one is, I don't know if it's a myth, but it's a big misunderstanding that if you eat something that you'll just be fine if you take your epinephrine. That's not always the case. I mean, it's rare. The medicine should always work, but it's not always the case for everybody, because it's scary.
Yeah.
You never want to eat it. People are like, oh, you could eat it and just take your medicine.
No, absolutely not. And people and also not to joke, jokes about,
sure,
haha, just take your medication, or, it's not funny to joke about something that can kill you. So to try not to, I don't know if that's so much of a myth, is what we'd ask people to try not to do, because it really isn't funny to joke about that. I'm trying to think. One other myth is that the packaging, and if you go to the grocery store and you see school safe, there's no regulation around that.
Yeah, that's what I
also
thought.
on labels themselves, there's no regulation around what's called precautionary labels. So if it says made in a facility with, made on shared equipment, may contain, none of that's regulated or labeled the same. So we can't really trust those labels a lot, and school safe does not mean school safe for everybody. So just because it's school safe just means nut free typically, and nuts are not the only allergen. So I think that's a myth that we encounter a lot. It's oh, it doesn't have nuts, you can eat it. And we're well, we really can't, sorry.
Let me ask you this one question then. When you went to Costa Rica, you had a fly down there. Do airline flights, when you're in circumstances like that, everyone's packed together, are there certain things you have to do there?
Love this question, because there's other advocates who have done amazing work in this space that have allowed us safety measures. So there's a lot we do, and by law we are allowed with food allergies to pre-board every airplane, and we wash it down. On the last flight, I came from a food allergy conference in Chicago, and I got on my plane and there were pistachios sitting in my seat. And so just to give an example, so we get on early with wipes. We wipe our own seats down, the seat buckles, the TVs that people touch with their hands, anything that could risk us having to have a reaction and make that plane go down, for an early landing. Nobody wants that. So we pre-board, we wash, we always, if I'm traveling alone, you inform somebody that you have an allergy and where your epinephrine is. To Colin's point earlier, if he was to go unconscious, they need to know where the epinephrine is. We try to sit where we block him from the aisle if we're going as a family, because that way when the food cart goes by, in case anything splashes or spills, it wouldn't affect him. But in general, it's really, again, hand washing, cleaning the seats, and then we only will bring our own food, because airline food is not regulated or labeled the same way that most other foods are. So we never eat anything provided by the airplane. And even in airports, you have to be really, really careful.
I'm going to let that be our last word. We've been talking to Christine and Colin Hood as they navigate around all of these food allergies that Colin has and still have a good independent life. Well, that's our program for today. We hope you've enjoyed our show. If you missed anything, you can listen to the full episode at wjct.org and on your favorite podcast app. Thanks to all of our guests. Our executive producer is David Luckin. Stacey Bennett is our producer. Brady Coram is our director. Caden Collins is our researcher. If you have questions about this or any topic, let us know by calling us at 904-358-6362. Email us at health@wjct.org or tag me on social media at jservin. I'm Dr. Joe Servin, and you're listening to What's Health Got to Do With It on WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Thank you for listening, and stay in touch.
Support for What's Health Got to Do With It is provided in part by the American Brain Foundation invests in research across the spectrum of the brain, knowing all brain diseases, disorders, and injuries are connected. There can be no cures without research. Learn how you can make a difference today at AmericanBrainFoundation.org. Rethreaded needs you to make a difference in the lives of human trafficking survivors. Learn more about supportive services and an array of survivor-made products at rethreaded.com. And by Neurelis, a leading neuroscience company focused on the development and commercialization of therapeutics for the treatment of epilepsy and other neurologic disorders. The company's unique drug portfolios strive to address unmet needs in patient care. Learn more at Neurelis.com.